Greetings, everyone. Magandang umaga, or I should say magandang tanghali. This is, after all, lunchtime, but in today's video, we will set up a WordPress server within a development environment from the previous video in this series. Our environment is a basic Debian 12 LAMP server that's Linux, Apache, MariaDB, PHP, running in a virtual machine. To make the VM more of a development environment rather than just a server, a lightweight Windows manager and a few graphics tools have been installed as well. Please note that this is a continuation from an earlier video. In that earlier video, we created the development environment we're going to be using in this video in VirtualBox. Now, I know VirtualBox will be considered a controversial choice by some, but for my situation, its convenience, ease of use, and functionality make it a good choice. If you are interested in how we got to this point in this project, please take a moment to review the previous video. I should stick a link somewhere, I think. Okay, maybe at the end of the video, maybe here. Anyways, for this video, we have several tasks to accomplish. We need to install WordPress required and recommended dependencies. These are programs and PHP modules. Download the WordPress archive. Copy the files from the archive to our web folder. Create a database for WordPress. Adjust permissions on our web folder. And finally, activate WordPress. Additional tasks will be to determine if there are any additional applications that need to be installed in our development environment, and I can think of one right off the top of my head, a graphical archiving program. Anyway, let's get on with it. All right, the first thing we want to do is take a look at the WordPress hosting page. We want to look at the server environment section. We can leaf through this and we can see the various programs required. A web server, you can see Apache here, and there's some other ones listed. We'll be using Apache too. The PHP, that's kind of a complicated issue, and you'll find various WordPress versions require different versions of PHP. I mean, they'll work with some versions, and it's complicated, okay? Use the latest version of PHP you have with the latest WordPress is easy. Then, of course, we've got some PHP extensions. We've got a couple of must-have extensions we'll talk about, and then there's some nice-to-have or recommended extensions we're going to talk about also. Some of these you don't need. Based on which Linux distribution, the names might change. There's a lot of stuff going on here. And once we get beyond our PHP extensions, there's some additional system packages recommended by WordPress, and we'll go through those as well. Then there's the database section. Don't worry about this. We're going to go through this each individually rather than you trying to decipher this page. I've done it for you, so hopefully what I suggest will work, and if you're using Debian, it should work fine. Well, let's go ahead and talk about our WordPress application needs. We're going to pretty much install everything almost everything they recommend. Mainly because I don't know what modules you're going to be downloading or what plugins. So we're going to try and cover all bases here. None of these really take up a lot of space on your drive, so it's not a problem to install them all. So required is a LAMP server, a web server with a database and a server-side programming language. Again, we're using a Debian 12 LAMP server. That was already done. It was done in the last video in this series. Again, I need to link that somewhere so you can go check it out. Additional suggestions, and these are the applications. Curl, this is a utility to transfer data between computers, whether they be local computers or remote computers. GhostScript is a PostScript PDF file interpreter. That's if you want to display PDFs or PostScript documents. ImageMagick is a suite of utilities for manipulating graphics. OpenSSL is a full-featured general-purpose cryptography toolkit, and that one is actually already installed. It was installed in it was an actual automatic install in our last video when we installed OpenSSH, so we could run an SSH connection to our server. That required this one, so it's already installed. WebP tools for VP8 and VP8L. I'm not so sure about these image formats, how much they're used. Same with the AVIF tools for AV1 image format. One thing I want to point out, AVIF in Debian is libavif. I think it's libavif 15. It's not AVIF. I need to check in that a little more, but that's actually already installed. So moving onward, let's talk about PHP modules and the absolute required PHP modules. First one is the JSON, which is short for JavaScript Object Notation. That one is installed with the default PHP, so it should already be installed. We need one of the following database modules. We installed PHP MySQL last video, so both MySQL-I and MySQL or LND are installed already on our server. Now we get to the highly recommended. And again, none of these are too terribly big, so I'm going to go ahead and install as many as I can figure out. So curl, these are going to be php-curl or php-dom, DOM. That's how they're going to be listed as packages, but curl is an API or application interface for the curl program we loaded earlier. DOM is document object model. It's another API. EXIF, access image metadata. This is things like geolocation, date taken, last modified, things like that. File info is identity data and encoding via internal magic bytes. If you've ever used Linux, sometimes you'll notice files don't need to have an extension to be recognized for what they are. In fact, in some cases, Linux looks inside the file for these magic bytes. It tells it whether it's a PNG file or a JPEG file or a Word file or whatever. It's sometimes not reliant on an extension. Hash, process messages using hashing algorithm. EXIF, file info, and hash were installed by default with PHP. OpenSSL was also installed by default. PCRE was also installed by default, which is regular expression pattern matching, which should probably really be the subject of a video at some point, because that's an interesting topic. IG binary replaces a PHP serialization function. It's actually more efficient, so we're going to use it. iMagic is an image magic API. INTL, internationalization. You're going to need this one if you're expecting people in different countries to different places in the world to use your website. If not, and you probably don't need it. MB string, multi-byte character codes. Yeah, for multi-byte character codes like UTF-8. XML, remember XML on the next slide, but that's define, manipulate XML parsers. And again, it'd be like PHP XML. And then zip is just basically zip compression. But again, remember XML for the next set. So other stuff we're going to need, or you're going to want. So memory catching module. There's I think 4 or 5 listed. I'm going to be using APCU. There's memcached, opcatch, redis. Use whichever one you're familiar with and that works for you. So I guess I should have made APCU green since I'm going to be using that one. Time zone DB I made red because generally speaking, PHP comes with the time zone DB installed. The only time you need a separate time zone DB is when it changes significantly between PHP releases or whenever your package and your distribution is updated. So we're not going to be using it. There's one already installed that's fairly up to date. BC, arbitrary precision mathematics. This is basically a command line calculator. In Linux, it's called BC Math, so it'll be PHP-BC Math. Filter sanitized data. That's already pre-installed. That basically cleans up data coming in, coming out, looks for certain things, and cleans up your data. Image is a default image manipulation software. We're going to be using iMagic instead, so we don't need to install this one. iMagic has many more capabilities. ICONV, convert strings between character sets. This would be like going from ASCII2 to UTF-8 or what have you. It's already installed. SHMOP, access Unix shared memory, already installed. Simple XML and XML Reader will both be installed when we install the PHP-XML. So they're not installed yet and they're red because we don't need to install them. They will be installed with the XML when that's installed. And zlib, which is already installed for gzip. Then SSH2 is remote access via secure cryptography. We'll have to install that one. FTP, file transfer protocols installed. And sockets is also already installed. So when we wrap this all together, we will come up with some commands to install everything we've talked about here. All right, let's go ahead and talk about what we actually need to do to install some of this stuff. So for the applications, since we're installing and not just looking at stuff, which we're going to go through all this in an actual terminal in a little bit, but I just wanted to talk about the commands first. So we're going to do sudo apt install, and apt is the Debian installer advanced package something or other, but apt. So sudo gives us root privileges, and then we're going to install curl, ghostscript, ImageMagick, and WebP. And that'll take care of all the applications we need to install that aren't already installed. As far as the PHP modules, I'm going to break those down into 2 lines so we don't have a continuation line, but it'll be sudo apt install again, and then php-curl, php-dom, well, you get the idea, IG binary, PHP magic, PHP intl, PHP MB string. And then the second one, PHP XML, which will also install those 2 extra XML programs, PHP zip, PHP APCU, PHP BC math, and PHP SSH. These are just here for your benefit. If you want to write them down, you can freeze the video so you'll know what the commands look like when I go ahead and execute them in a little bit. All right, let's go ahead and switch over to our virtual machine and start working on our installs here. We'll go ahead and open a terminal, go to full screen mode. Let's poke around a little first so you know how to find what's there and what's not there. So for example, with our AVIF, we'll do an apt list, pipe bar, grep, and then we'll look for AVIF and the word install. And we can see it's libavif15 stable. It was installed automatically. I'm not sure which program installed it. If we'd actually installed it directly, it would just be installed. But if this is installed as a dependency, we get the automatic. If we look at PHP, we can see the it's PHP BC math. So if we look at PHP BC, we can see that it's PHP BC math. Not installed yet either. If you want to look at all your PHP modules that are installed, we'll use PHP-M, and then we can scroll through and you can see some of these like EXIF, file info filter, some other ones, JSON that were already installed. So I mentioned that we don't have to install them because they were already there. Okay, now we're going to actually install some stuff. So we're going to use, again, we have to use sudo so we get root access, because you have to have root access to install. So sudo apt install, and this is our extra applications, curl, ghostscript, ImageMagick, and WebP. We give our password. Now we can look here at the packages that are going to be installed, how much we're going to be downloading, and how big this will actually take up on our hard disk. You notice like here, 94.9 megabytes, not a lot of space, at least in today's standards. And we just go ahead and wait for them to install. And if we do an apt list grep curl.install, now we can see it was installed. Our curl program was installed. So let's clear and let's work on the PHP modules next. So we'll type out our first line here. And again, we can look at how much, this is 4,000, basically 4 megabytes we're installing here. It's fairly quick. And then let's go ahead and work on the second line from our previous slide. Now, if we do a PHP-M, we can see all the modules are now installed that we need, or all the plugins, modules, whatever you want to call them. And let's take a look at our hard drive. If you watched the last video, we're only using about 10% of the drive so far. All right, that was it for getting all the WordPress requirements installed. I know it's kind of quick, but it's not complicated or hard. Like I say, we added this nice GUI just so we can make things a little easier when we're doing some stuff. We'll get into this a little more later. So the next thing I want to do before I actually install WordPress or download WordPress is I need to update, I want to add an archiving utility, command line one, to our GUI. So the default one for Xorg is Xarchive, and it's not installed yet. So we're going to go ahead and install it. sudo apt install xarchiver. And again, not a lot of space being used here. All right, going back to our desktop in our virtual environment, let's go ahead and open up the file manager, and we'll open up our local JWM RC config file. We'll open up our .jwmrc config file in our home directory. I want to come over here. I installed Tango icons last time around, so no, I don't want to look in Tango. I want to look in High Color Scalable. There it is. xarchiver did install an icon we can use. So this is already in our icon path here. So we'll just create another item in our program menu or start menu, if you will. Get the icon name. It's an archiver. It's xarchiver. And the command is xarchiver. Then we'll restart, and it should now be in our start menu. And there it is, and yes, it opens xarchiver. All right, we're ready to move on to downloading the WordPress archive. Okay, our next task now will be to download the WordPress archive. We're going to do it two ways. We're going to do it with our browser, since we installed a browser in our environment, and we're going to do it with wget from the command line. So we'll open up our browser, WordPress download. If I copy the link, we'll paste it in here, and we'll go ahead and open a terminal, wget, and we got to clean up the link a little here. And wget will now download the file, and we can see it's there in our home directory now. It's a zip file. It's called latest. Anyway, if we go back to our browser here, we can go ahead and download the WordPress archive through our browser. You'll notice it has a bit of a different name here. Now it's called WordPress-6.6.2. Let's re-download it again to the same folder. As you can see, these two are the same size, and if we open them up, you'll find they hold the same files. It's just the name that changes when you download them, depending on how you download it. Once we download it, we need to so once we've downloaded it and we expanded it, it's no longer in its archive format. We need to move it over to our variable www HTML directory, but if you can see, that belongs to root, so we don't actually have permission to do anything there. So we're going to back out. We're going to use sudo, and we're going to run our file manager from the terminal, and now it's running with root privileges, so we can copy everything and paste it in. I want to put a dot back on our original index in our info PHP file, so we won't be using them. But yeah, opening the file manager through the terminal, we can do it as root and copy things, which should tell you that we need to change permissions at some point. Next on our task is to create the database. WordPress does require a database. So before we get to that point, there's a few things, and you'll find out when we get into the WordPress install, that we need to know up front. Specifically, we're going to need to know our local database credentials, which would be a database name, a database user, a database password. We're also going to need WordPress credentials, specifically an administrative user, an administrative password, and a site name. So you want to think up these before we get going. I'm not going to be using anything complicated here for database names, since this is a private server. It's never going to connect to the internet, and it's actually just, I'm actually creating this server. I've got another one I'm actually using, but I'm creating this one for these videos. So anyway, the process for database creation is we're going to log into MariaDB as the root user. Again, we're going to have to use sudo, and this will be interesting because we've got to enter two different passwords, and then create database, create user, and grant privileges on the database to the user, and then flush privileges and exit. Sounds like a lot, but it's not all that hard. It's fairly easy to do. So we'll go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and jump back into our virtual machine, and we'll open up a terminal, and we'll do this database thing. All right. So sudo MariaDB, TAC U for user root, and then TAC P for password. We're going to have to do two passwords here. First is our sudo permission password, and then the actual database password. The database password should be the same as your root login password if you have a root account. And you'll notice the change in our prompt here. First thing we'll do is create a database. And like I say, I'm not going to be too terribly original here. WordPress WP Database. And I forgot the semicolon. Always got to end these lines with a semicolon. So we'll put it there. And we've created our database. Next, we'll create a user. WPDB, WordPress Database, WPDB user. Again, we're not getting very fancy here. Needs to be at localhost and identified by, we'll make the password WPDB user. We'll make it the same, but you can make it whatever you want. It's just easy to remember for this example. And don't forget your semicolon. Okay. So we created a database, we've created a user. Next, we want to give the user permission for our database. So grant all privileges on. One thing I want to mention here, people use capital letters when they're in the like MySQL or MariaDB. I found you don't really have to. I guess it's better for explanation what's a SQL command and what's actual data, but I'm using them, so I just wanted to mention that. So WP database .star. So your database can be made up of tables and reference it with WP database and whatever your table name is. So this gives us permission on all tables within that database. 2, and then our WordPress user localhost semicolon. And then flush privileges. And finally, we'll just exit. And that's it. We've created our database. And we've created a database user. So next step is to get WordPress up and running. Okay, I think I spoke a little quickly here. What we need to do before we actually try and run WordPress for the first time is we need to change the permissions. I mentioned this earlier. Right now, this folder belongs to root, and that's not going to work for what we need to do. On Debian, the web user is www.tacdata, and the web group is www.tacdata. So we'll fire up the command line. We'll cd into our var/www. If we do an ls, tac.al, we can see that HTML belongs to root. So we'll do a sudo change owner or chown www.tacdata for the user and www.tacdata for the group and HTML. And we should really put a capital R in here, dash capital R for recursive. So it will change everything in the folder as well. Now, if we do a list, we can see that we've changed everything to www.data. All right, our permissions are set. All right, now for the thing we've all been waiting for, getting WordPress actually up and running. So we're going to open our browser. This is in our VM, and we're going to go to localhost, and we're going to come to our first step in the WordPress install or it's not installation. We've already installed it. It's activating it, setting it up, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, we need to choose our language. For me, English, United States. And then you'll read a list of stuff, which I told you we're going to need already. Database name, database username, database password, database host. They don't mention the admin user for the WordPress account once it's set up, or the site name, but we'll get to that. So we'll put in our database name, or username, or password, localhost, and unless you've got multiple databases, just go with the default for the table prefix and submit. And it says, all right, Spanky, you've made it through that part of the installation. WordPress can now communicate with your database. If you're ready, time now to run the installer. Oh, run the installation. Anyway, let's do it. Now, see, it's going to ask for a site name, a username, a user password, email address, etc., etc. And then we're going to run the installer, and success. It's time to log in. So we'll enter our name and password, and we'll log in, and we're at the WordPress dashboard. We can look at what our site looks like. There are a couple issues by the way we did this that we're going to have to correct in the next video. Specifically, I'll mention it right now, that if I try and log in from outside of my virtual machine, I'm going to get some errors. The pictures aren't going to come through. That's because the pointers in the WordPress config file are pointing towards localhost instead of the IP address. In our next video, we'll go ahead and fix this and do a little setup with WordPress and look at creating a block theme. But for right now, if you have this problem and you want to access it from outside of the virtual machine, you need to, from inside the virtual machine, go to the settings, global, and make sure you use the IP address instead of localhost. But other than that, we're done. We're there. WordPress is up and running in our development environment. So I guess we can do some development next. Well, like I say, we'll do a little configuration in the next video, then we'll look at development. All right, that's it for this video. We've got WordPress up and running, at least on localhost. Like I say, there are some issues. We can resolve those. I mentioned that already, that if you go to your WordPress dashboard in your VM and you go to settings, general, you'll see that it's pointing towards localhost. You should really change that to the IP address, and then it will work not only within your VM, but external to your VM. But again, we'll cover that next time around. There's a couple other video ideas I want to run through, so the next WordPress video probably going to be 2 or 3 videos down the road. I want to do something on immutable distributions, as I've heard that buzzword so much now. I got to do something with it. And there's a couple other things I want to do before moving on with the WordPress videos, but I do want to eventually do the final WordPress video where we'll set things up and we'll work on creating a block theme. Might be 2 videos. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, that's it for now. So like usual, like, subscribe, comment. Always interested in comments. But thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time.